Britain's Princess Anne, King Charles's only sister, is in the hospital this morning. According to a statement from Buckingham Palace, Princess Anne suffered minor injuries and a concussion following an incident at home yesterday.
If you asked anyone in Great Britain about Princess Anne, they would smile and probably say she's the greatest royal daughter of the British royalty who never became queen. Despite being a royal daughter of what many consider to be the greatest monarchy on earth, Princess Anne always chose to have a life on her own terms, becoming the first royal Olympian and even escaping a kidnapping attempt. But hold up, how did a princess, the sister of the King of England, choose to live this way? There's no doubt that she could have stayed in her family's high castle and waited for the war to blow over. But rather than sit and watch, this princess dedicated her life to the public, becoming one of Britain's most respected members of the royal family. Today, we'll dive into the fascinating life of the woman who should have been queen, and how her latest antics have once again shocked the world. And to watch more exciting videos like this one, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary to know what the true values are and to stick with those, not worry too much about the things, the fashions, the things that come and go.
The princess's life began on the 15th of August, 1950, at Clarence House in London, England. The second child and only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Anne's life was thrust with responsibilities and duties from a young age. She did not have the typical childhood that most people usually do. From a young age, a sense of duty and responsibility had been placed on Princess Anne's shoulders, even as a young child. Barely a few months after her birth, she was baptized on October 21st at the music room at Buckingham Palace, where her godparents, her great-aunt Princess Mary, and her great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, were in attendance. The princess would spend most of her childhood days at the Clarence House, where her parents lived, sharing a very close relationship with her brother Charles, who was then the Prince of Wales. But there was something different about Anne. She lacked the reserved nature of royal daughters and was known to be quite mischievous and playful. In fact, the residents revealed that Anne was always itching for adventures, making her the principal mischief maker in the family. Princess Anne was mostly homeschooled. Her education began at home, where she was taught by a governess, Catherine Peebles, up until the age of 13. But she didn't pay as much attention to her education as her parents would have wanted. Instead, the princess always wanted to be around horses. But this wasn't a passion that grew entirely out of nothing. Her father, the late Prince Philip, had an intense love of playing polo, and her mother, who was still Princess Elizabeth at the time, also spent several hours each day watching horses race. Naturally, Anne developed an intense love for the equestrian sports, to the point that her father once said, "If it doesn't fart or eat hay, she isn't interested." At just the age of 3, before she could even walk properly, Anne could be seen on horses, strutting around the barn with her parents watching. By the time she was 11, Anne was so good at riding horses that she debuted in her first professional competition, before even recording her first victory at the Windsor Home Park jumping event. At the age of 13, her parents decided it was time to put a lid on homeschooling, a decision which pushed the princess to the private Benedin School in Kent. This school was Anne's opportunity to delve into a larger world of knowledge, but it also provided her a chance to try out all the fantastic horses that were at the Moat House Riding School. Unfortunately, after barely 1 year at the school, Anne suffered a terrible injury. While riding a pony, the princess's little finger got caught in its rein, causing a bone to crack and causing a severe injury. But despite this injury, Anne wouldn't back down. This obsession with horses wasn't just a passion of the princess's. It also afforded her a chance to take a break from the pressures of royal life, helping her find an escape into the company of horses. In fact, she once said that she enjoyed the company of horses better than humans because they didn't care that she was a princess and treated her just like everyone else. However, growing older presented Anne with a much more complex reality. She had to become a public figure while also chasing her dreams to become a competitive rider. Eventually, in 1968, after her graduation from Benedin, she made the decision to join the British Olympic equestrian team. And here, something more personal happened to her. While training with the team, Anne met a young Mark Phillips, a talented and handsome young man who was on the reserve team. What seemingly started as a friendship soon blossomed into a romantic relationship, and by 1973, they tied the knot in a widely televised wedding, which is estimated to have had over 100 million viewers. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right after the princess found love, she once again set her sights on conquering the equestrian world. In 1971, she finished 4th place at the Rushall Horse Trials, and this instantly announced her as a force to be reckoned with. Only a few weeks later, she almost finished 1st at the Badminton Trials, but after her soon-to-be husband, Phillips, took the lead from her, she slipped to 5th place. The loss was devastating, but the world had gotten the message. Princess Anne wasn't messing around. Later that year, she had got her first shot at a major victory after she won the gold medal at the European Eventing Championships, before also getting named to the BBC Sports Personality of the Year. This was not just a historic landmark for the young princess, but it also marked the first time a British royal would win a European gold medal, and of course, the first to win such a prestigious award from BBC. But the road to this victory was nothing short of difficult. A few months before the event, Anne was in the middle of a medical emergency. The princess had suffered an inflamed ovarian cyst, and this made it difficult to ride or practice for her upcoming events. Fortunately, she healed just in time for the event to get started and took home the gold medal. However, in an unfortunate twist, the victory wasn't going to last long. Anne knew that she had set the bar after her performances in 1971, so she spent the next few months working twice as hard to be selected to the British Olympic team. But this Olympic dream was dashed in 1972 after a terrible accident that caused a strained tendon. This stopped her from riding at the 1972 Badminton Horse Trials, potentially ruling out a spot in the British Olympic team. The next year, she tried again at the 1973 European Championships in Ukraine, but just like the previous year, she had an injury that once again ruled out a spot in the Olympic team. The next year somehow had more troubles for the princess. On the 20th of March, after a charity event, Princess Anne and her newly wedded husband Phillips were on their way back to Buckingham Palace when a Ford Escort forced their car to a halt at the mall. As soon as this happened, the driver in the Ford, later discovered to be Ian Ball, stepped out of the car and began shooting in the direction of the princess's car. Anne's security detail, James Beaton, also stepped out of the car and began to engage the shooter in a shootout. But Beaton's gun suddenly jammed, and this gave the shooter an opportunity to injure the inspector, before also shooting Anne's chauffeur. Seeing that the princess was in danger, a journalist named Brian McConnell tried to help, but since he didn't have a gun, the shooter had one up on him, before eventually shooting him in the chest. With the princess's entourage injured and away from the car, the shooter walked towards her and told her of his plans. He explained that he wanted to kidnap her and hold her for ransom, which would be around 2 or 3 million pounds. The kidnapper then explained that his motive was good, as this money would later be given to the NHS. So he ordered the princess out of the car, and then the unexpected happened. Politely, the princess responded, "Not bloody likely," and sat rooted in the car and even considered hitting the kidnapper. In a later interview, she admitted that she wasn't scared of the kidnapper, but knew that being rude could have radically changed things in that situation. After a brief moment, she stepped out of the car and was eventually rescued by Ron Russell, a former boxer, who knocked out Belle and walked the princess away from the scene. As luck would have it, backup arrived, and the men who had been shot earlier survived their injuries, all making remarkable improvements after days of treatment. But despite this traumatic experience, Anne was not going to back down from her equestrian dreams. In 1975, Anne was getting tired of not reaching the height she had set for herself. So despite dealing with a cold and fever, she pushed herself to participate in the 1975 championship in West Germany. And to the surprise of everyone who watched her and her horse, Goodwill, she won silver medals in the individual and team categories. Unfortunately, this fairy tale life was about to be hit with another disaster. In April 1976, Anne suffered a tragic crash. And this wasn't the sort of injuries she's had in the past, but something far more serious. After her accident, the princess suffered a fracture on her vertebrae, leaving her in extreme pain and putting her dreams of an Olympic spot way beyond her reach. However, quitting wasn't one of Princess Anne's strong suits, and after enduring bouts of rehabilitation, treatments, and training, she was back on a horse, eventually becoming the first royal to get a call-up to the British Olympic team. But due to the energy she had invested in earning her place in the team, her stint at the Montreal Games was so forgettable that her fans, mostly the whole of England, began to feel pity for her. But that wasn't the only tragedy from the Montreal Games. During the competition, the princess took a hard fall off her horse and jumped right back on it. There were no obvious injuries, but she was so disoriented that she had to rely on observers to tell her what was happening just so that she could finish the event. The Olympics would turn out to be as uneventful for Anne as the previous event, as she suffered a fall, left with no medals, and finished at 24th place. But to make this even worse, she has no memories of that day, with pictures and videos being the only proof that she once represented England on the big Olympic stage. After her abysmal Olympic performance, Anne would go on to record successes in other events, scoring 6th place at the badminton trials in 1979. But the pressure of family life was quickly weighing down the equestrian, and after the births of Peter and Zara, she decided to take a step back, focusing her attention on horse racing until she became a champion at it. In 1985, she competed at a charity horse race at the Epsom Derby, finishing at 4th place. Interestingly, the princess's passion for horses extended way beyond just riding. In 1986, she took over as the president of the Fédération Équestre Internationale and served until 1994. But despite this rich and full life in equestrian sports, the princess still found a way to complete her royal duties, and even did more than what was asked of her. Not only has she worked with over 200 charities and organizations, she's also been actively involved in projects in South Africa, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Mozambique, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. This extensive work eventually led to a Nobel Peace Prize nomination in 1990, which eventually went to Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, while the princess has maintained a stoic approach towards life, some of her actions have been met with controversy. Believed to have inherited the sharp tongue of her father, Princess Anne has been nicknamed her royal rudeness. Back in 1982, she got in trouble after she told photographers to naff off at the badminton horse trials, an act which many quickly defined as proud and inconsiderate. In November 2002, she also became the first member of the royal family to be convicted of a criminal offense after she pleaded guilty to having her dangerous dog out of control. This dog eventually attacked 2 children, and even though the kids turned out fine, she was found guilty of violating the Dangerous Dogs Act of 1991. This seemingly trivial issue, however, took on a new shape when a dog psychologist took the pet in for evaluation and discovered that the dog wasn't harmful, but actually extremely playful. But this didn't stop the authorities from making the dog go through compulsory training, and the princess also had to pay a fine of £500. This conviction wasn't the first time the princess has gotten in trouble with the law. In the 1980s and 1990s, she got in trouble several times for going over the speed limit to the point where her license had to be suspended for a month. But none of these events has had as much impact as her love life. From her teenage years, Anne always admitted that she was not everyone's idea of a fairy tale princess. Anne's love stories began with Gerald Wald, a man who would eventually become Prince Harry's godfather, and a polo player named Sandy Harper. Having shared a very brief romantic relationship with these 2 men at separate times, Anne was again linked to the Earl of Caithness and Brian Alexander, but like her 2 previous relationships, this ended almost as quickly as it started. But in 1970, Anne met Andrew Parker Bowles, and this was different from everyone she's met in the past. What initially started as a friendship soon grew into a fling, and it was rumored that these 2 lovebirds were on the edge of getting married. In an unfortunate twist of events, Andrew would go on to marry Camilla, while Anne would marry Phillips, leaving many to question if the relationship they had was ever serious. Years later, tabloids began to examine the cracks of this relationship, and many believed that Andrew had to let go of Anne because he was Catholic, and this made their marriage very unlikely. These rumors took a strong stance when Andrew and Anne remained friends, with Andrew later becoming the godfather of Zara Tindall, Anne's daughter. At first, Anne and Philip's marriage was a perfect royal union, but after the birth of their child, Zara, the cracks of their marriage became public. Many believed that not only were they both involved in affairs, but Phillips was also about to father a new child from a different woman. Of course, this sounded like gibberish at first, but in 1985, Phillips welcomed a love child with Heather Tonkin, a New Zealand art teacher. But Anne was unbothered, as it was believed that she was having secret affairs of her own. These claims first began in 1979, when a married police protection officer, Detective Sergeant Peter Cross, was rumored to have snuggled with the princess and even had sexual encounters with her. To make matters even worse, Peter Cross was relieved of his duties after the royal family thought he'd become too close to the princess. 4 years later, Cross would finally speak out, admitting that all the rumors were true, before adding that the princess even had a secret name for him, Mrs. Wallace. After her rumored affair with Cross and his eventual dismissal, Princess Anne got in a relationship with Captain Timothy Lawrence while she was still married to Phillips. To complicate matters even more, a collection of love letters between Anne and Timothy were stolen and sold to a newspaper, putting an eventual end to her first marriage. Now aged 73, the life of Princess Anne is still as interesting as it was several years ago. In June 2024, the princess suffered head wounds and a concussion at her estate after she was seen walking one of her favorite horses. Unfortunately, this accident caused a concussion and another memory loss, which are quite similar to what she suffered many years ago at the Olympics. After spending a total of 5 nights at the hospital, she returned back home and is now back to giving public appearances. And the first since she's returned? An appearance at a charity horse riding event in Gloucestershire, where she presented awards and shook hands with the competition's winners. Even though Princess Anne would never become the Queen of England, there's no doubt that she's had a pretty fantastic life, one filled with risks, dreams, and a shot at something that once seemed impossible. She might not have ever won a medal at the Olympics, but in 2012, her daughter, Zara Tindall, took home silver at the 2012 London Olympics, an achievement that was not only important to the royal family, but one that also made Princess Anne feel fulfilled.